Hello everyone, today we read and comment von Clausewitz's foreword to his Vom Kriege. So, foreword of the author. That the conception of the scientific does not consist alone or chiefly in system, and it is finished theoretical constructions, requires nowadays no exposition. System in this treatise is not to be found on the surface, and instead of a finished building of theory, there are only materials. The scientific form lies here in the endeavor to explore the nature of military phenomena, to show their affinity with the nature of the things of which they are composed. Nowhere has the philosophical argument been evaded, but where it runs out in too thin a thread, the author has preferred to cut it short, and fall back upon the corresponding results of experience. For in the same way as many plants only bear fruit when they do not shoot too high, so in the practical arts the theoretical leaves and flowers must not be made to sprout too far, but kept near to experience, which is their proper soil. Unquestionably, it would be a mistake to try to discover from the chemical ingredients of a grain of corn the form that the ear of corn which it bears, as we have only to go to the field and see the ears ripe. Investigation and observation, philosophy and experience must neither despise nor exclude one another. They mutually afford each other the rights of citizenship. Consequently, the propositions of this book, with their arch of interest necessity, are supported either by experience or by the conception of war itself as external points, so that they are not without abutments. Little note he makes. That is not the case in the works of many military writers, especially of those who have aimed at treating of war itself in a scientific manner, is shown in many instances in which, by their reasoning, the pro and contras follow each other up so effectually that there is no vestige of the tales, even which were left in the case of the two lions. Then the text goes on. It is perhaps not impossible to write a systematic theory of war full of spirit and substance, but ours hitherto have been very much the reverse. To say nothing to their unscientific spirit, in their striving after coherence and completeness of system, they overflow with commonplaces, truisms, and twaddle of every kind. If we want a striking picture of them, we have only to read Lichtenberg's extract from a code of regulation in case of fire, and this cracks me every time. So listen to what Lichtenberg was writing. If a house takes fire, we must seek above all things to protect the right side of the house standing on the left, and the other hand the left side of the house on the right. For if we, for example, should protect the left side of the house on the left, then the right side of the house lies to the right of the left, and consequently as the fire lies to the right of this side and of the right side, for we have assumed that the house is situated to the left of the fire, therefore the right side is situated nearer to the fire than the left, and the right side of the house might catch fire if it was not protected before it came to the left, which is protected. Consequently, something might be burned that is not protected, and that sooner that something else would be burned, even if it was not protected. Consequently, we must let alone the latter and protect the former. In order to impress the thing on one's mind, we have only to note if the house is situated to the right of the fire, then it is the left side, and if the house is to the left, it is the right side. And von Clausewitz goes on. In order not to frighten the intelligent reader by such commonplaces, and to make the little good that there is distasteful by pouring water upon it, the author has preferred to give in small ingots of fine metal his impressions and convictions, the result of many years' reflection on war, and of his intercourse with men of ability, and much of personal experience. Thus the seemingly weakly bound together chapters of this book have arisen, but it is hoped they will not be found wanting in logical connection. Perhaps soon a greater head may appear, and instead of these single grains, give the whole in a casting of pure metal without dross. So, as we've seen, it's a rather short foreword that is nevertheless important because it contains the attitude that von Clausewitz had, part of the attitude at least, von Clausewitz has towards the concept of system and and practice, if you want, and the problem of creating, in fact, a philosophy, a theory, fundamentally, from experience. So, he starts by saying that the conception of the scientific does not consist alone or chiefly in the system, and it's finished theoretical constructions. And it says, at this point in history today, we basically know this, that you can't basically ground something just plainly in the air, fundamentally. So then he adds that the system in the Vom Kriege is not to be found, in fact, on the surface, as the Vom Kriege, as we remember also from the notice that we read the other day, according to him, is not to consist into first of all, it's not a completed work, so it doesn't even have this broader construction that the same von Clausewitz would have wished to give it to it. But it's also and he explains that even later with the metaphor of the ingots, fundamentally it has a content that has to be found within the whole treaty. And instead of a finished building of theory, he says there are only materials. So he stresses basically the single elements that make up the Vom Kriege as individual elements where you can find the main content, even if a broader system is not yet finished and polished and perfectly constructed, let's say. Then he explains that the scientific form, as he calls it, basically lies into an endeavor to explore the nature of military phenomena, to show their affinity with the nature of the things of which they are composed. So fundamentally, there is an indestructible or an inescapable bond between the elements that constitute the military phenomenon and the science that can be drawn from it. This will be particularly evident when we will read what von Clausewitz thinks about military history proper. Then going on, here it says, however, it's not that we have eliminated any philosophical argument here, that we have basically ignored the theory, the construction of what would be a scientific theory fundamentally. But here it says that where it runs into thin a thread fundamentally, the author has preferred to cut it short and fall back upon the corresponding results of experience. So there are certain elements of theoretical nature that are better explained in practice than according to an abstract explanation. This might, if you're acquainted to von Clausewitz prose, you know what we're talking about. Fundamentally, he stresses sometimes certain even physical metaphors, as we've seen, we have said also in the other video, that certain times escape a more general definition, or at least give it at every time a kind of a different shade to underline the particular effect deriving fact from this experience, even from this very material realm, we can say, that can more effectively make us understand what the theoretical line would be fundamentally. So here in fact he uses one of those metaphors. He says, "For in the same way as many plants only bear fruit when they do not shoot too high, so in the practical arts the theoretical leaves and flowers must not be made to sprout too far, but kept near to experience, which is their proper soil." So it's very interesting that he rightfully defines the military art as a practical art, where it says there is theory, okay, but it doesn't have to be overly emphasized because it might substantially make you lose the point, or make you speculate about certain theoretical aspects that, although are important, they can be answered primarily by experience and true experience, rather than keeping to speculate in the air here. So this has always to be kept in mind when reading from Clausewitz. You can't basically formulate a theory on the military art without looking at war proper. I mean, real war, and therefore military history. Unless you're not a military man yourself, so that you know how certain things are also by direct experience, but generally speaking, also the same military man, just like von Clausewitz, and all you can imagine the people, the thinkers with whom he discussed, other officers, people who were acquainted with what had happened during the Napoleonic Wars, other things, etc., were fundamentally discussing. Reconstructing a war in this sense is necessary for everyone, because you can also participate to one action, but you're not going to have necessarily the complete understanding of the wall. And this has nothing to do, you may have a clear idea of what is happening, I don't know, at a platoon level. You might not understand what was going on at that point at a company level, or a division level, or even etc. So this is very, very important, and it's very, very difficult, because military history in this sense has to assist the theorist by the let's say those hard facts we could call, if there is anything about it that you can draw from that, which are very few sometimes. But I would say that there is a degree of approximation that every military historian knows, that however, without even in fact tracing this, anything strictly theoretical, already knows a sort of sixth sense how certain phenomena really work. Once that you have studied many wars, many battles, you're acquainted with certain aspects and you can start having this sort of practical understanding. Not necessarily you're going to become a good a general for this, to know what it really means. They're two completely different experiences, but nevertheless you can draw very important elements of the military art from this, only exclusively from the studying of military history in general. So, and here von Clausewitz makes another beautiful metaphor that also gets very straight to the point, and this is the examples I'm talking to you about, because this is how he backs his evidence. Here he is throwing examples fundamentally. Let's read it. Unquestionably, it would be a mistake to try to discover from the chemical ingredients of a grain of corn the form of the ear of corn which it bears, as we have only to go to the field to see the ears ripe. So here it's fantastic in many ways, because he obviously says, we don't have to get to the omnicomprehensive scientific studying of what a grain of corn would evolve like, in order to see the ear of corn, it only takes it only takes not to speculate too much on a grain of corn and its chemical ingredients, but just to go out in their field and see the ears ripe, and we know how it goes. So this is what is stressing, in fact, that there are certain aspects of theory that, when it comes to making a point in practice, a point that can be of use, just can be observed in other forms through through the consequences, fundamentally, through the fruits that they bear. So this is particularly evident in war, where you can start speculating on the minimal details that you can think theoretically into an army on the march, on a campaign, can be observed, but substantially getting to nothing, because all that matters ultimately is how the whole campaign evolved, even in its macroscopical epiphenomenal events that are, in this sense, to be regarded as way more meaningful than all these minutiae, fundamentally, and that altogether are completely difficult, very difficult to analyze individually, and cannot bring you profitably to a valid conclusion. While on the other hand, as we've seen, we have in parallel much greater evidence that is definitely more useful for building up the theory than this minimal details that would derive from a proper, say, a thorough analytical approach to every single detail. So then it says, investigation and observation, philosophy and experience must neither despise nor exclude one another. So obviously he does not disconfess the importance of philosophy at all. He's simply saying that philosophy is mostly served by experience, rather than this middle ground where, objectively something is going on, but we can't necessarily see in all of its dynamics. So this is a bit of how the same scientific method proceeds, fundamentally. We don't really, in the scientific method, we don't literally observe every single tiny aspect of one thing. We try to basically draw general laws, observing certain macro phenomena that are also more easily spottable, and then from there proceed maybe to observe in detail other aspects to refine that theory, and seeing if it works. But it mostly works in this back and forth from the theory and what you can find in this kind of more microscopical evidence, fundamentally, which comes from what von Clausewitz in fact calls as experience. And then it says, both investigation and observation, philosophy and experience, mutually afford each other the rights of citizenship. So fundamentally, they are. It's as if they were the two faces of the same metal, and they can't exclude one another, because fundamentally they are alike. They might have different identities, different procedures, different grounds, but fundamentally they are mutually exchanging the information we need. Then it says, consequently, the propositions of this book, with their arc of inherent necessity, are supposed either by experience or by the conception of war itself as external points, so that they are not without abutments. Now, here he starts this this note. then it says that it's not the case of in the works of many military writers, especially of those who have aimed at treating the war itself in a scientific manner, is shown in many instances, in which by their reasoning the pro and contra swallow each other up so effectively that there is no vestige of the tales, even which were left in the case of the two lions. So here, what is saying, if I understand it correctly, is that merely philosophical and before I stress the importance of the scientific method, of course, because even history is dictated by a scientific method, but von Clausewitz here is saying another thing, that is, war is not science, in the sense it's not a law, it's not something you can frame into a concrete system that once you define, you essentially can look at war at all times and knowing how to win it, for example, or thinking just trying to describe it in a way in which you understand how certain mechanisms can go, and you can essentially swing from an extreme to another, as he's saying here, and so that the substance in the middle annihilates it, is perfectly counterbalanced, and you don't even get to a practical point of it, because let's assume, I don't know, something goes perfectly wrong, something goes perfectly right, then what kind of practical of practical datum you're going to extrapolate from it? What is that you're suggested to do at this point with it? Because you can't create this perfect specular situation. Naturally, there is a criticism to the so-called internal lines, this idea of conceiving war as if it was a scientific game, where there are certain given dynamics that can present themselves, and you just have to follow the manual for which, that's how you have to follow them in a sort of even kind of a geometrical fashion. It is not like that. For Clausewitz makes a way deeper point here and stresses that there is no way you can treat war as in a scientific manner, because everything is much closer to an art fundamentally. Here he doesn't say it, but eventually he will in the book, in the work, so that what should be stressed is not the properly scientifical side, that is the belief you can understand everything, literally everything about it. When you study it, you have to be scientific, and you have to proceed by analysis and synthesis. But the evidence that you draw from this procedure shows you something very different. That is fundamentally that war is not frameable into a theory that can scope every single event that happens, for instance, on a battlefield, and that you can, understand in all times. Von Clausewitz tells you that this is not real, because it's never like this in war. There is always something you can't fully assess in a war at all times, and therefore there are other qualities, if you want, that are required in order to be an effective commander and to understand the phenomenon of war through maybe certain principles that, like the ones we have read in the other video about the during the notice, the Nachricht, but that at every time are declined in a different way. So you can follow them generally, but you have literally to follow them. I mean, it's you who makes the difference in pursuing certain lines and, hoping to get it right some way through other forms of understanding, of ability, and so on. But you're essentially navigating into literally into a mist at that point, and there are only certain elements that are kind of evident, or more or less evident, or you think that might be evident. And then there's a huge deal of aspects of war that you can't you can't see, and therefore you have to orientate yourself in a manner that can help you naturally to learn more about them, but at the same time to make a sort of sacrifice of part of this information, or to try to extrapolate what is more important, and then to act on that track, fundamentally, on this path, that as foggy as it can be, and as as it needs constant reformulation, it can, however, lead you to to a real to a good conduct in that specific situation. So, what is the importance? Substantially, von Clausewitz is saying that such highly theoretical, completely scientific approaches to history, to military to the art of war can be, if they're not, however, cited by sheer substance given by experience that can help you build that understanding of war in a way it can be useful, not just an abstraction. This is fundamental. Then he goes on, and he says, so it's not impossible, it says, to write a systematic theory of war full of spirit and substance, but throughout our own at this point. And up to this time, this has happened in quite in the reverse, fundamentally. People stuck too much to the theory, not giving attention to the pragmatic side of an art. So, exchanging war for the one of war for a science, and not of an art as it should be. Then he makes this example that is extremely funny if you have understood it before while I was reading it. That is a bit difficult to explain it in word, because it's essentially the same. What is really funny about this passage, that I won't reread it, but essentially here, as we've seen, von Clausewitz is reporting an extract from a code of regulations in case of fire by Lichtenberg, and basically in this description, Lichtenberg makes all a point basically in a row of houses, because you have to think houses how they were at that point, all close to one another, when a fire broke out, and therefore he starts giving this regulation, concentrating exclusively on determining from what is that you have to consider the right side of the house or the left side of the house, relatively to the house that is burning and the houses that can be either left or right. So he makes this absurd point that doesn't get to any kind of consistent solution, for which he's just saying something, stating something obvious, that in practice is you have to start acting from to protect the side of the house that is closer to the other house that is burning, and all the problem is determining now not how you have to do it, but just making you understand which is left and right, and this is absolutely nuts. And in fact, and I don't reread it because okay, let's reread it for how ridiculous it sounds, but von Clausewitz here is making a very powerful point, because this is really how this person had theorized the problem. There it says, if a house takes fire, we must seek above all things to protect the right side of the house standing on the left, and on the other hand the left side of the house on the right. For if we, for example, should protect the left side of the house on the left, then the right side of the house lies to the right of the left, and consequently as the fire lies to the right of this side and of the right side, for we have assumed that the house is situated to the left of the fire, therefore the right side is situated nearer to the fire than the left, and the right side of the house might catch fire if it is not protected before it came to the left, which is protected. Consequently, something might be burned that is not protected, and that sooner than something else would be burned, even if it was not protected. Consequently, we must let alone the latter and protect the former. Now, this is the most important phrase of the whole thing. In order to impress the thing on one's mind, we have only to note if the house is situated to the right of the fire, then it is the left side, and if the house is to the left, it is the right side. So this cracks me every time, and it's because it's exactly here. It's not surprising that really von Clausewitz, is using it. It makes you perfectly understand for which reason. Excuse me, I drink a little bit. Because this is all theory and no practice, and the regulation is entirely missing completely the point. When a house is burning, I can understand, space. I don't need you to tell me what is right or what is left, which is, by the way, something completely relative, just from which, perspective, which direction you want to take that into consideration. That's not the point. And in fact, von Clausewitz also writes something very subtle afterwards. He says, first of all, in order not to frighten the intelligent reader by such commonplaces, and then he adds, and to make the little good that is distasteful by pouring water upon it. Literally, that's what he's saying. Don't think about right and left, just pour water on the damn fire. That's how you should do it. Then he continues, the author, so von Clausewitz himself, has preferred to give in small ingots of fine metal his impressions and convictions, the result of many years' reflection of war and of his intercourse with men of ability and of much personal experience. That this is something we had seen written also on the in the notice that has been inserted by the editors in the in the first after Marie von Clausewitz preface and this foreword of von Clausewitz. So here von Clausewitz is essentially stating what we should conceive also like the information that is providing to us. So here he talks about small ingots of fine metal that are fundamentally his von Clausewitz's impressions and convictions. So what he, as we have seen, although lacking a fully formed, a fully refined scientific form, however, contains a pretty substantial information, pretty substantial and concrete information and knowledge. Therefore, the point here is that you don't have to search for, a completely aseptic system for which you basically don't know even what we're talking about, because it's so theoretical, you don't know how to apply it. You have to take all these small chunks of information, analyzing them for what they are, realizing that they stem fundamentally from a very concrete evidence deriving from experience, and treasuring them in some way. Small ingots of fine metal. So von Clausewitz says, thus the seemingly weakly bound together chapters of this book have arisen, but it is hoped they will not be found wanting in logical connection. So here he's stressing the fact that although his work was yet to be finished at this point, and these books had been definitely outlined, as we know, and they, albeit they do have some, they're partly devoid of this more perfected structure, they still have a logical connection that has to be understood through the information that is contained to them. And I must say that the Vom Kriege is pretty clear to this. I mean, you realize it's. I mean, the first time you read it, you immediately understand it's part of a broader system that develops a bit in a not really in a confused way, because it actually von Clausewitz is very, he makes a sort of structure that is also easy to follow, but that contains within still this raw precious information that you have to evaluate bit by bit, and to follow this organism, fundamentally this structure that does have a certain fundamental lines, a fundamental line that makes it makes more than sense. It's really a whole there's a geist, a whole ghost that permeates it, as von Clausewitz wrote, that makes the point, so that you can't see the ghost, but you can feel it. And definitely, when you read and study Vom Kriege, you realize that ghost is pretty real. It's pretty evident, and it is really what it informs our understanding. So he says, in fact, that's the seemingly weakly bound together chapters. So it's just in appearance they're kind of weakly bound together. There is a broader substance that unites them, that connects them, and that is pretty logical, and it is pretty right. And as we have read the other time, von Clausewitz was sure now that the principles that it said were the Hauptlineamente, as he calls them, are clear. This is very important, and are the right ones. Okay, so he got it before dying. He had gotten to the point. So it is left in part to us to understand it, but here von Clausewitz is essentially having a scruple, the one of not having given a perfectly uniform systematic form. In fact, here it says the very last phrase that is also very humble in many ways. It says, "Perhaps soon a greater head may appear, and instead of these single grains, give the wall in a casting of pure metal without dross." Now, von Clausewitz, I'm sorry to tell you, but we didn't have this greater head of you than you. So, but you did great, and thank you very much. But he's very noble von Clausewitz to hope that someone would have come that would take all these single elements that he had put together and given it the wall in a casting of pure metal without dross. So, like, I don't even know how to express this quite plastic material metaphor, but it's as if this work had to be uniformed, homogeneized in some way, but that is kind of more a form in form than in content. And it's pretty obvious, because the work had to be finished, but it's the content that really was already done. Okay, it was already finished in its essence, in its meaning, in its broader message. Okay, so definitely the Vom Kriege can be read as a complete expression of von Clausewitz's thought, albeit it was unfinished still, and it was about to be finished, by the way, as his wife Marie states in the preface. He was about, essentially, he died in November 1831. He was to finish the work, according to her, and according to him, in the following winter. So really just a very few months of work, not anything. And he had been working at this for many years at that point, fully dedicating at it just in the after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Having found the time, it took really many years, plus all the experience that he had gotten literally on the field about war, and knowing all these other what he calls here men of ability. In the notice he had called them this, if I'm not wrong, this soldiers, distinguished soldiers. That. So yes, this is practically what I believe von Clausewitz here is trying to say. It's very, also in here you realize it's a very concise foreword, and definitely it's way more interesting now to get finally into the work. I don't think I have anything to add. I mean, there would be lots of things to add. I think that I'm making this brutally concise, but these are topics that should should need entire university classes to be fully explained. I do what I can, but I don't promise it's it's perfect, but I hope at least to get to the point for what it is. So for now, completely undetached from the Vom Kriege, I will stay hopefully 7 weeks away. If the plane doesn't crash, I should come after 1 week once again to make videos. So don't freak out. I think I've left you here for with more videos than you can watch fundamentally, because I've been doing these videos literally every day, 4 hours, and I think you're plenty of stuff to watch if you're interested. And I think we will go on with von Clausewitz. My main concern actually is I want to go paragraph by paragraph. So there are certain paragraphs which are excruciatingly long, others that are very short. So I don't know how to compensate this. I also should make the videos in a form that can be easily followed into a playlist or something like that. And we get really into the core of von Clausewitz thought. And I repeat, I don't know how much it will take, because if I make a von Clausewitz video every 2 or 3 days, I don't know, this will take literally years and years before to finish it. So I will keep talking about other topics, military history on the channel, not just about general history, medieval history, as I'm doing right now. But the reason why I started also this von Clausewitz series is in part that it's relatively less demanding sometimes. When I make the videos on other topics, it takes a bit more of research and of have to find pictures and so on. So this is relatively easier. So that's also the part of why I started it. But certain passages are definitely very difficult to comment. So it also takes some time for me to get it to the point. Okay, so for now, I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you are interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. As always, I hope to come back in 1 week, holding one piece. And for now, I thank you once again for everything, for the likes, for the watch and the views, etc. And I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.